So let's start working on this off screen. I will work on it throughout this module. Now I just want to add some elements so that we can play around with them from a styling perspective. On this off screen, I guess it makes sense to have some heading where we say, please log in, maybe something like that. Then I eventually want to have a button where we can switch between log in and sign up. So here I'll just hard code switch to login, but we'll later dynamically change this depending in which mode we are. Then we have our submit button, so I'm going to change the title. And then I want to have up to 3 text inputs. Either 2 text inputs if we are in login mode, just for email and password, or 3 text inputs if we are in sign up mode, for 1 extra input to also confirm the password. So for that, I'll first of all also import text input from React Native. Now let's add the text input here in our component. And the text input is a self-closing element. Now we can always hook this up and make it work correctly later. For now, I just want to add a placeholder here where I say your email address. And then I'll add 2 more for now. The second one should accept the user password, and the third one will accept confirm password. Now, as I said, I will hook up this form later so that we have two-way binding and we also show different soft keyboards for different inputs. All of that will be done later. Now I want to focus on the styling. Let's save this. And if you turn on live reloading on your applications, you see it works. We get a warning here on the right that we're missing the on-press hook on our button. We'll add this soon. But here we got our inputs. Now, obviously, the styling of these inputs could be improved, and the overall styling of the login form of the authentication page is not where I want it to be. I want to have my entire login content here centered in the page, so in the middle, so that the user immediately sees it when he looks at my page. And of course, I want to change the way this text looks. I want to maybe also change the way these inputs look. I want to have some padding between the edge of my screen and all these elements. These are all things I want to improve. Now let's do that step by step. Let's first of all center everything. How does centering work? I touched on this earlier in this course. We use flexbox for this. Keep in mind, all our content here is held by a view. And a view is a container which we can style with flexbox, where we can lay out the child elements with flexbox. So for this, first of all, let's create a style sheet here, because you learned you should use one if possible. So let's create a new styles property here below our component code. And that actually is reaching out to style sheet and calls the create method, where we pass a JavaScript object configuring our style sheet. And here I want to have some container property. And regarding the naming of these properties, it's totally up to you, but it makes sense to give the wrapping container a name like container so that if someone else looks at your code, has an easy time finding out where this style might be applied to. Let's first of all give this a border color of red, just to see where this container starts and ends. To see that border, we also need to set border width to at least 1 though. Now let's assign this container to this view by setting the style property there to styles container. Let's save this. And now if our application reloads, reload it manually if it doesn't automatically, you should see this red border. Now one thing we can immediately see is that our container, which contains the entire content of the off screen, doesn't take the full available space. Now you learned why that is. You learned that you need to set one specific style property if you want that behavior. Now let's first of all inspect this. You can turn on the inspector. The cool thing is, if React Native debugger is attached and you click on there, it also selects the element here on the right in this component view. So wherever you click here, it then selects that element here on the right too. So that's pretty convenient. Let me turn on the inspector, turn off the inspector now. And I'm interested in that view, which is my wrapper for the off screen. If we have a look at the off screen itself, it has no style. The view, however, has some styling. Here you see this is the default styling it assumes, and you see our rules down there. Now you can click here next to this curly brace to add a new style. And watch what happens if I now enter flex 1 here. Now you see suddenly the red border spans the entire screen size. The reason for this is that flex 1 basically instructs this view to take all the available space. To be very precise, flex 1 simply tells your priority to get a piece of the available space is 1. If we had a sibling element to this view, so a sibling in off screen, which we don't, but if we had this, and this sibling would also have flex 1, then each would get 50% of the screen because they have the same priority. Here it's the only element, but previously without flex 1 it had no priority, so it only took what it needs defined by its children. If you set flex 1, it takes what it gets, and here with no sibling, that's actually all the space. So we need to set flex 1 to have the full space available, because only if we have the full space available, we can position our elements in there. And if I want to center them in the middle of our page, I first of all need to get access to the full page. So with that, let's actually remove the border color red and the border width, and let's add flex 1. Now let's save this, and if it reloads, it looks just like before, because we haven't added any other meaningful rule. Let's dive into that again. So let's expand this until we get this view again. And let's add another style. Let's play around with justify content and align items. Remember the slides I showed you earlier in this course? Justify content is used to distribute elements along the main axis. The main axis is defined by the direction of flexbox, and the default direction is column, so from top to bottom. So if we add justify content here and set this to center, it should actually be centered in the middle of the page, vertically. So let's add center without quotation marks, and now our content is centered in the middle of the screen. You can now also see that if I now add flex direction, all camel case, because we're not using real CSS here, and I would set this to row, it actually is totally messed up because now it's distributing it from left to right. Now the default, which we don't have to set, is column, but again, we don't have to set this because, well, it's the default. So that's already looking a bit better, but it would also be nice to have horizontal centering then, right? Well, for this, we need to center on the cross axis. And as you learned earlier, you can do this with align items. Align items centers on the cross axis. Since our axis or our direction is column from top to bottom, the cross axis is from left to right. So here if we enter center, now we got horizontal centering too, and all of a sudden this looks much better. So let's add these setups or these styles here. Let's set justify content to, and here you need quotation marks to center because otherwise it would try to refer to some variable named center. And also align items to center. Now if we save both and let it reload, we should have the styling we saw before, but now out of the box. Clearly the widths of our inputs aren't awesome, especially on Android we can see this. It only takes the width it needs to take, and it doesn't respect the placeholder for that. So we will need to do something about that. But at least we got our flexbox positioning done. And definitely play around with it to feel very confident using flexbox, because it's so important to be aware of how to use it to create nice looking, appealing UIs.